gonna try to do this while baby is sleeping. Hey there, Fiber Junkies! Welcome back to The Color Cauldron. I'm Johanna, the owner and dyer behind Potion Yarns and host of this podcast, and today is time for another Saturday night at the movies. If you're a new viewer, let me just tell you what this is about. Once a month or so, usually once a month, I try to do an episode on knitting and the fiber arts in film. So this could be knitting, crochet, spinning, weaving, sewing, embroidery, anything having to do with wool or yarn or something along those lines that we spot in films, and then we do a little film review and we pair with it a pattern that is inspired by or featured in the film, or something that just seems like it goes with the theme of the film or the era or something along those lines. It's really, really fun, and usually it's just like a quick little flash here and there, but sometimes we actually get the fiber arts to feature rather prominently throughout the film, either occurring quite a bit or being integral to the plot. We do a little bit of everything here, from the tiniest little mention of sewing or something all the way up to someone knitting all the way through a film. It's really fun, and it's a great way to introduce yourself to new films that you might not have seen before, or something that might be out of your ordinary lineup. This month's film is kind of a more obscure one, so it's not one of these super well-known films of the era. If you're an old movie buff, you probably are familiar with it or have at least heard of it, but if you're not into watching old vintage films from that era, you probably, or I don't know, maybe you have heard of it, but I had heard of it but had never seen it before, and so this was kind of fun for me to try something new, and I was thrilled to see that fiber arts actually took a really integral part in this film. And the movie is And Then There Were None, 1945. This is a great black and white classic film. It is based on an Agatha Christie book, and it's actually, I think it's the first Agatha Christie book that I ever read in junior high, ages and ages ago, when my older sister got me hooked on murder mystery stories in the form of Agatha Christie books. And I think this was either the first or second one that I ever read, and it's a stunning film. It was also published in a certain, I don't remember if it was like a certain era or if it was just certain countries, but some of the older books you can find in used bookstores, it's published under the title 10 Little Indians, but most of the time it's published as And Then There Were None, and that's the title of the film that is based on the book. Basically, the plot centers around a group of people that are all invited out to this private residence on an island. So it's a remote location, there's nobody else on the island, they're all being hosted by someone, and they arrive on this island. Most of them, I think all of them, don't know each other prior to that. And as they're kind of settling in and getting ready, the butler plays a record that the host has left for them, a recording from their host who hasn't shown up yet, who basically says you're all invited here because you were involved in the murders and or death of someone, either death under suspicious circumstances or murders or accidental death or whatever. And so basically they're all insinuated to be guilty in some way and connected to these murders. They've all been invited here, and the host never actually shows up, but he is basically pitting them against each other and trying to get them to like kind of turn on each other. And so he starts picking them off one by one, and so someone will die, and then everybody is all freaked out because someone died and it doesn't really look like it was an accident, and then one by one they all start dying. So increasingly they're getting more and more suspicious of each other. They're trying to figure out the truth behind, did you really murder that person? What were the circumstances behind that mysterious death or whatever else? And the reason it's called 10 Little Indians in some renditions of the book is because it is based on an old nursery rhyme poem kind of a thing about 10 little Indians, and each one, it's actually pretty gruesome and gory. Like a lot of those really old-fashioned nursery rhymes and fairy tales were pretty gory, and you're like, wow, they told this to children back in the day? Holy crap. It's pretty gory. So like one of the little Indians hangs himself, and so it's like 10 little Indians, and then one of them does something, chokes and kills himself, and so now there's 9, and then 9 little Indians, and then one of them does XYZ and dies, and now there's 8. And so it goes all the way down there until the last part is, and then there were none. And so that's where the other title comes from. So the whole time that people are dropping like flies, they're dropping in ways that are connected to this poem. So one of the little Indians hangs himself, somebody's gonna hang themselves, one of them chokes on something, one of them chokes on a drink and dies. It's things like that. So the whole it's kind of a mystery behind who's the mysterious host. Is he the one that's killing everybody, or is it one of the murderers there that is killing everybody else so they can get away with their crime because now everybody knows what they did, and all of that suspense. And I won't spoil it for you and tell you who's really murdering everybody and what's going on. I'll let you watch the film and find out for yourself. So what does this have to do with knitting? Well, this is actually one of those rare films where knitting features very prominently throughout the plot, and I was thrilled about that. So in the beginning, we see all of these different people on this island, and one of them is an older gal played by an incredible character actress of the 30s and 40s named Judith Anderson. She was amazing. She had a really distinctive face and this incredible, cold, distinctive voice. I absolutely love Judith Anderson as an actress. I think she's amazing, and she plays a really great part in here as kind of the prim, kind of stuffy, kind of cold character, as was kind of her traditional roles that she got cast in. And she's this older lady, and she has her knitting with her in almost every scene, if not every scene that she is involved in. And so while everybody is dying around her, she calmly knits on and doesn't really get very close to any of the other characters. She's kind of the opposite of what you would expect of the stereotypical little older lady who's knitting and really sweet and grandmotherly and all of that. She's kind of the opposite. She's pretty cold, pretty distant. She's a little judgy. She's a little, leave me alone. I don't want to get involved with anyone here. And she's knitting through basically everything, even when they're discovering murders and everybody's sitting around freaked out and talking about, like, well, it's got to be one of us, or is it the host, and all of this stuff, and she's just sitting there knitting in the corner. And there's also a cat, and the cat keeps playing with her ball of yarn, and she keeps getting really frustrated with the cat for getting into her knitting, which is something I think we can all relate to, right? So that's where the knitting takes place, really all over this film, pretty much anytime she's in a scene, and sometimes even when she's not, you'll see the cat playing with the ball of yarn or something like that. So our pattern for this month, you may have already guessed what it is because I've been wearing it. I think I have actually talked about this sweater on the podcast before as just something that I had finished a long time ago, but I know I have some new viewers, so you guys probably haven't seen it since then, and even if you've seen it before, we've never featured it as a pattern on Saturday Night at the Movies, and I thought it was perfect for that. This design is a modern pattern. This is called the Tongue-Tied blouse. So if you just search for Tongue-Tied by Amy Apple is the designer, and I will put a link to her Instagram in the description box below. She has created this really unique aesthetic that I absolutely love, and I started following her because her niche in the knitting world is vintage and retro kind of rockabilly inspired patterns. So she tends to focus more on the 50s and early 60s, but she does have a lot of her designs that are very 40s-esque or could be 40s or 50s, which is what I felt like about this blouse. So this blouse is actually a little bit closer to a 50s style, but it is kind of that crossover 40s, 50s era because of the shape. And you could make it definitely much more 40s by adding some shoulder pads or a little bit of a puff sleeve up here if you wanted to alter the pattern and you felt confident doing that, but you definitely don't have to. What I love about her patterns are they're modern, so they're very well written and clean, easy to follow. She does a really great job of walking you through patterns. Even this sweater has a little bit of an unusual shoulder shaping that I'd never done before, and I found it really easy to just follow her directions and walk through everything in the pattern. And I also love it because she has a huge range of sizes on her patterns. They usually go from pretty extra small to an extra large, or pretty much all of the sizes you could want in there. And so I've been really happy about that because it's easy for me to recommend them to a wide audience base because they will fit so many different sizes. And because they're knitwear and everything, and she uses a lot of like stretchy ribbing and stuff in her sweaters, it's also really forgiving in the sizing. So I love that about her because it has the conveniences of a modern pattern. Like you can download it online and print it off. You can do it in indie dyed yarn, and she tends to work with a lot of indie dyed yarn, so they're very well suited to that kind of yarn, as well as the wide sizing range and easy to explain. And she does a lot of in the round patterns, so there's oftentimes minimal sewing, although she does have some patterns that you sew up with seams. A lot of times they're in the round, minimal sewing, relatively easy techniques and things like that, and just better suited for more modern knitting, but they have that vintage look and feel that a lot of us really love. I've tucked mine into my fabulous skirt so you can't really see, but there is ribbing at the bottom as well. And it is a pretty short sweater, so mine is hitting right about my natural belly button line. You can, of course, extend that and bring it down lower if you have a longer waist or if you just like a more modern fit to your sweaters. But I would caution you that when you are doing that, you tend to lose some of the vintage look because you're changing the silhouette. And a lot of what makes patterns for knitwear more vintage looking and vintage inspired is the silhouette and shape of the pattern, not just like the styling and stuff. Of course, you can take a modern pattern, style your hair kind of vintage, and put on some red lipstick and call it good, and it will have that vintagey vibe to a degree. But if you really want a more true vintage look, you kind of have to go with those similar types of shaping, which is what I love about Amy Apple. She really blends the modern and the vintage together. So these are, some of her designs are some of the most comfortable sweaters that I have knit in a vintage style. They're very, very comfy and easy for me to wear and style, but they still have that true vintage kind of aesthetic that I really, really love. So I like to make mine according to her pattern directions, which is pretty short and more of a cropped kind of a fit and feel, and a little bit longer sleeves. I did shorten the sleeves slightly because I have shorter arms and I didn't want mine to come down quite as long, but you can go even shorter if you want. You can go longer. You could even, I've seen people alter this pattern online and make 3/4 sleeves or full length sleeves. And Amy Apple Patterns, she usually writes in several options for you on sleeve shaping, waist shaping, etc. So you can customize it a little bit, which is another thing I love about her patterns. This is not my yarn. This is actually knit out of some Anzula hand-dyed yarn, which if you've never checked out Anzula yarns, they are a really fabulous indie company that's been around for quite some time. They specialize in really beautiful tonals or semi-solid colors. And this is a color called Mauve that was in their collection ages ago. I bought this years before I was an indie dyer, and it sat in my stash for a couple of years, and then I slowly started knitting a sweater with it, hated it, ripped it out, and repurposed it as the tongue-tied blouse not that long ago. And I'm really glad I did because it was perfect for this sweater. And this is their sparkle sock, so I don't know if you can tell. I'll get a little closer, but this does have a beautiful sparkle to it, and I really love the subtle sparkle because it's soft. It's stellina, which is what I use in my sparkle yarns. So it is a nylon fiber, and it is soft enough that you can wear it next to the skin and it's not itchy or scratchy, but it has that bling bling factor that I really love. And I just love the soft baby pink of this color that they called Mauve. I'd call it more of like a baby pink, but whatever you call it, it's gorgeous. I love it. And they have lots of different colors in it, but it's a fingering weight yarn. So this is something you could do in something from your stash if you have a lot of fingering, or something you can purchase. The other thing I love about vintagey sweaters like this one and the shorter length, like the cropped style, the shorter sleeves, etc., is it takes much less yarn. So for the smaller sizes, like extra smalls through maybe a medium, you only need 2 skeins of yarn at 400 or more yards that will make up a sweater. Now you might be running a little bit close to the end of it, but it will go in 2 skeins, sometimes 3 in the medium range. But a lot of times even the large size sweaters will only take 3 skeins of fingering weight, and larger sizes will only take 4 or 5, which is really good for a sweater. That's so much more affordable, especially when you're doing a nicer quality yarn or a hand-dyed yarn or something a little more luxury like a cashmere or silk blend. So I love that this is something that you can easily stash dive for or purchase without spending an arm and a leg and buying 10 skeins of yarn or something like that. Another great reason to go vintage. I also love that it's super fitted. I tend to like my clothes a little more fitted and sleek, not as big and voluminous, although I have definitely got times when I love those big cozy cushy sweaters that are just oversized. I really like the clean vintagey feel of a more fitted sweater, and that is really what you get with this one. So I love it. I highly recommend it. That is our featured pattern. Again, I'll put a link to her Instagram where you can see all of her patterns and purchase from her down below. I'm also going to put a link to the film. Now, as of this filming in January 2020, I watched this film for free on YouTube. So I'm going to put a link to that below so that you can go watch it for free as well. Obviously, movies come and go on YouTube all the time, so I don't know if it's still going to be free, if it'll be available on YouTube or not. So if not, you can probably purchase this, I would guess, on Amazon or Best Buy or Barnes & Noble or something like that as well. If you want to purchase the film, sometimes you can purchase and watch it or rent it on YouTube as well, but when I watched it the other day, it was free and you could just look it up. A lot of those older films, the copyrights expire and they are able to put it up for free, or people purchase rights to put the film up for free on YouTube. And so that's a really great way that you can watch some of these older films that are a little bit harder to find and aren't just on like Netflix or Amazon Prime. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Fun little video this time, kind of a fun little like mystery thriller, really interesting. Also, since it is a book, you might go check out the novel, especially if you're into mysteries and Agatha Christie style and all of that. Agatha Christie is a great author in my opinion, and I really loved this. I thought this was one of her better books in my opinion. Maybe it was just because it was one of my first and I have fond memories of falling in love with that genre and her in particular, but I think it's a really good book. I hope you guys enjoyed this and you have fun. Please give me a thumbs up, share this video with everybody you know who likes movies and knitting or fiber arts of any type. And if you have a suggestion for fiber art films in the future, please leave me a comment below and let me know which films you think I should review next that features some type of fiber arts or wool in them, and I will give it a watch. Also, leave me a comment and let me know how you're liking this series and what you want to see more of on this podcast in 2020. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, but it is now time to cast off. Love you.